This panel is our last panel of the day. Thank you for sticking it out. It is every bit as important as the last two. It is the impact of immigration policies on labor trafficking. Our moderator today is Dara Lind, who has covered immigration in some form for about a decade, stretching back to college when she observed immigration court proceedings for her senior thesis. She's a Vox reporter since the site launched in 2014, where she's explained everything from federal data on police shootings to the enduring appeal of moving to Canada fantasies, while keeping a close eye on the theory and reality behind American immigration policy. She also hosts Friday episodes of The Weeds alongside Matt Iglesias, who you should probably be following on Twitter. Dara was a 2014 fellow with John Jay College's Center for Media, Crime, and Justice, so she's also an alum, in a sense, and a 2017 reporting fellow with the University of Southern California Center for Health Journalism. Please welcome Dara. She's going to introduce the other panelists. Welcome, Dara.
Hi, so for those of you who have been here for the day, do we have this on? On? Yes. On, hi. So for those of you who have been here for the day, it's kind of felt like we're looking at the same knot of problems from several different angles. So while Tanvi's panel looked at it through the angle of relief and TNU visas, and the previous panel has looked at it from the perspective of a particular population, we're now looking at it from the perspective of a particular kind of crime or form of exploitation in the form of labor trafficking. And so hopefully we will not pull back and do a 101 level, because that would be backwards because we're the last panel of the day, but show a little bit how existing practices, existing labor relations, and truths of kind of immigration status and vulnerability create an environment for labor trafficking even outside of the current administration, and then how the Trump administration's policies, which we've heard some about in previous panels, but which our panelists also have seen the effects of, have changed, have kind of created ripples through the fabric of this existing form of exploitation. So we have the opportunity to start by hearing for the first time today from a survivor of trafficking, Edith Mendoza, who is here as an organizer for Damayan, Migrant Workers Association. She is a trafficking survivor who was trafficked by diplomats, who became a worker organizer and a cooperative board member for Damayan in 2017, and became full-time staff in January 2018. And so Edith, with the assistance of Rio Ortiz, also of Damayan, is going to tell her story, and then we'll hear from Riya and other panelists about what labor trafficking looks like from their perspective.
Thank you. I feel nervous, actually, especially when I see you. And the one is in the screen was the one I was working with. The moment that I started to work in that diplomat's huge 3-story house, it darkened my life. I don't need to start with that. Yeah. So I came to US in 2015, January, and dreaming that of giving my family a better life, which been telling some of the panel members here just a while ago. So I have that also the same ambition. When I came here, as I step on that kind of big, huge house, I can't imagine that I will be there, working with four kids, with young 4 kids, under 11 years old and 1.5 years old. The contract I signed to work for 35 hours a week with overtime pay and benefits was violated. I found myself forced to work for 80 to 100 hours, imagine, hours a week. I worked 1.5 years every single day as all about around domestic worker. I had to wake up 6 a.m. and work straight sometimes until 1 in the morning, such as laundry, ironing, and even sewing in the middle of the night. I don't need a... Oh, is it? I worked for 1.5 years with the diplomats from January 2015 to June 2016. The contract I signed to work for 35 hours a week with overtime pay and benefits was violated. And the one that I am the same employer she worked with. And they did the same with Cheryl. As if a nanny job was not hard enough. Being a nanny for 4 boys, and if you call it boys, they are so active. And when they are after school with playmates, I of course do some supervisions, serving them foods with different food preferences, and it costs me a lot of works. Aside from those, I would deep clean and sort out 6 bathrooms in 6 bedrooms, including stock rooms, closets, and various areas in that huge house, even the fireplace. And there were 2 birds that freely flying around the corners of the huge house that I show you. So how big is that? Did you live to that house, or have you ever been a kind of big house, just doing all the house chores by your own, one person in one day? So I even do all the house chores until midnight. It's not even done before I go to bed. So if you imagine here that there were the 2 birds. So the 2 birds are really annoying me and struggles me every day because I need to clean the pieces and sanitize the whole house. So I need the tall ladder to reach out. I think this high building, the high windows seems look the same with that. So those are my experience that impacted my my life so much. Say the everyday laundry. This every day, not even once a week. Just those are everyday house chores. I cannot imagine. I cannot even finish at the middle of the night. Aside from those, I need to iron and sewing torn clothes at the middle of the night before getting to bed. So these are the this is the basement that 2 team suckers, we call that soccer teams can play in the basement. So if you imagine the parameters of the house, floor area is the same with the basement, and there are big stories at that area, and the other room is also tennis table that also 2 teams can play with. So these are the kitchen. The kitchen that I'm doing. I'm sorry to show this. Of course, because of the food preferences that individual wants to eat, so it makes the kitchen so messy because I need to rush doing those food to cook before the time to eat comes on time. They want 10 minutes before they will eat. So 10 minutes to prepare is about 10 minutes. To cook is just 5 minutes. Should be done. Because they want to eat just new food or new cook all the time. So aside from babysitting, I cover those one because my boss keeps asking me not to show or put them to media. Sorry if there are some up here knows them. Please don't tell them. So this is the basement, and the youngest one, and the second to the youngest. So those during the parties, I do also decorations and cooking and serving them all the time, or whatever food they want to. So cooking. These are just some of the photos that I saved, because when I know my rights, when I went to Damayan, I knew already my rights, and I tried to install some photos during my chance, if I have chance to take photo, just to see how hard I was working with diplomats. So the 2 cars driveways, and this was my room. My room was the storage, actually. So it is very near to our garage. So once they opened the door, it rang, and I always disturb. Or especially when they went out for traveling or vacation, when they come back at the middle of the night, I disturb all the time, and I need to help them to taking all the stuff inside the house. So after that, I cannot sleep and continue to work until the work is done. So during the snow time, at first, of course, I was so excited because when I first hold the snow, that was 2015. We don't have that in the Philippines. So I was so excited, and I said, wow, I hold the snow, and I told to my family, I already hold snow in my real life. But I can't imagine that afterwards, it makes my body deteriorated. I mean, falling apart. I feel very tired. It seems that my body it's falling apart, and my health getting deteriorated in my later days. So aside from those, that's the really hard thing that I did is I need to clean the fences that surrounded the house perimeter fences. So imagine how big the space. It's really painful for me because I need to take the pail of water back and forth just to clean the fences. So make it look like new painted. So I pity myself. I did not do this in the Philippines, actually. So after 1.5 years working with the diplomats, I'm sorry. I will always hurt myself in this part because my health was deteriorated. And see, my body has fallen apart and got worsened. And I was bleeding for 3 months, It came to the point that I can't feel my head anymore. It numb. Though I hit object on my head, it wasn't, I can't feel anymore. So I was worried, And I asked my boss, would you mind to please let me see the doctor? I need doctor attention now. Because I feel dizzy, I feel very bad. I cannot move easily. Every time I move, I feel like I'm collapsing. So I kept telling them, and it kept refusing about it. So I was looking for some way how to get out from that horrible place. So when I asked my friend in the church, they told me to ask help from Damayan. So through Damayan organizing, they helped me a lot. They gave me services free, and they connected me to the health agent for me to look at what I feel and refer me to pro bono lawyers. At first, I was so scared because of my innocence, I just take those hardships and struggles because I don't like to lose my job, because I don't like my family knows about my situation, because I want them to give better life. But then it turned to the point that I lost all the dreams that I had before I left my family. So being separated to my family is hurting me. And when I encountered this kind of job in United States, which I know that United States is a nice place, which everyone dream to come to U.S. But what you heard from the panelists this afternoon, same thing with us in the Philippines. We came here, some of the women workers came to U.S. They separated from their family just because of their dream to give better life for their family. Some of the workers in our organizations separated for about 8 to 10 or 20 years more and never see their family. And yet, when they came here, they encountered a hard or a struggles or the victim from their employers, as what I had. I am a victim. I am a trafficking survivor. I was trafficked by the diplomats. Diplomats, I'm sorry for those who are working with the diplomats department. But the reality is we cannot fight for them when they are in their position because of their immunity. Because of their immunity, I cannot get my money, which is I work for my whole life. That even I am even dying, but they not even care for me when I ask help from them. When I need to go to the doctor, they keep refusing me. You need to work. It is unreasonable. It is unacceptable to go to the doctor when you are on your duty. Is it not human? Is that the way they treated you as a human? Are they not human? I am a human. I am not a robot. I am not a machine. But why they're doing this? So through organizing, I found myself in Damayan. This is a challenge for me. I have the passion now to work as an organizer, to develop the power, to develop my ability, to tell to the workers not to be scared. They will have to speak up, because I found the truth in organizing through the Damayan that we are working with the Know Your Rights training. We are doing a lot of education for us to know about our human rights. So since then, I empowered, and I had that challenge to move on, keep moving, until I found myself that I regenerated, because there is human rights in the United States in federal law. We have to fight for our justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Edith. No worries. To kind of continue, and also from Damayan, I'd like to hear from Rio Ortiz, who's the lead organizer and case manager for Damayan. She handles cases of Filipino domestic and migrant workers with labor trafficking, fraud in labor contracting, domestic violence, and stolen wage cases, among others. She also organizes the trafficking survivors and helps develop them into social justice leaders, serves as the liaison for Damayan's partner attorneys, leads Damayan's anti-trafficking and modern-day slavery campaign, and represents Damayan in Beyond Survival, the anti-trafficking campaign of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. As a queer immigrant Filipina and daughter of a domestic worker, Riya has 22 years of organizing experience in the Philippines and in the U.S., including organizing Filipino domestic workers and their children. Riya, can you talk about what labor trafficking looks like from your perspective, and about the work of empowering survivors like Edith to organize?
Okay, great, thank you. Well, first, thank you to the organizers for inviting Edith and me in this panel. We've learned a lot from the other speakers, and we hope to also contribute, our what we know in this conversation. So Damayan is an organization for Filipino domestic workers. We have more than 2,000 members, and most of our members are domestic workers, meaning they're babysitters, nannies, caregivers, elder caregivers, and also low-wage migrant workers, such as restaurant workers, laundromat workers, etc. And many of our members are also labor trafficking survivors, so meaning they were trafficked. The trafficking survivors we work with were mainly trafficked through guest worker visas. For example, Edith came here through a G5 visa, right? So A3 G5 visas are domestic workers of diplomats, meaning ambassadors or consular officers who work in the United Nations, or in Washington, D.C. We also work a lot with B1, B2 visa holders or domestic workers of professionals who work in big organizations like the World Bank and other rich professionals. We also work with H-2B visa holders or low-skilled seasonal workers in hotels and resorts. And lastly, with J-1 visas or students who are on-the-job trainings and also teachers. So in Edith's case, Edith was still living with the diplomat when she found Damayan. She found us through the internet. She sent this really urgent email, and then we met with her. I met with her. We did an intake. And then we referred her to our Workers Academy, which is basically a 4-part workshop series that we give for labor trafficking survivors. So in there, she met other workers who were trafficked by diplomats and who were trafficked by placement agencies through the H-2B visas. They shared their personal stories of migration, what pushed them to come to the U.S. and what were the conditions, that they worked in. We also invited lawyers, to give Know Your Labor Rights workshop. So that was when Edith found out that there is actually a minimum wage, that covers workers like her, regardless of their documentation. We also do a Labor Trafficking 101 workshop, where we discuss labor trafficking. For many of these women, they are trafficking survivors, but they don't even know what trafficking means, right? So we really have to break it down, what trafficking is and what the signs of trafficking. Because for Damayan, they are the true experts in their cases. And it really helps their cases if they understand what are the signs of trafficking. So after Workers Academy, we gave them certificates. We did a small graduation. And we provided a pro bono attorney for Edith to handle 2 of her cases. For her immigration case, we referred her to Sanctuary for Families. We also work with other service providers like Womankind and Restore. And so she was actually able to win her trafficking case already. And she will be reunited with her husband and son in a few months. We also filed a labor case, this time with the help of the Community Development Project at the Urban Justice Center. So we filed the case in, I think, June 2017. But because he was an active diplomat, the case was dismissed. We also organized a rally in front of the German consulate. So imagine being trafficked, in a diplomat's home, and then, 1 or 2 years later, Edith was rallying in front of his employer's workplace with a megaphone. They were so surprised, for us to be there, because I think the Kohlers, Pit Kohler, did not expect to see Edith again. But she showed up at his workplace, with 200, with 70 other people. And then we also marched in front of the UN because he needs to be held accountable. I'm not sure if, well, I'm sure many of you know that diplomats are covered by diplomatic immunity, meaning they cannot be charged or prosecuted under any U.S. law. So Edith was owed $75,000. Like what she said, she was working 80 to 100 hours a week, for basically $4 an hour. When on her contract, she was promised 35 hours a week for $350. So the contract was not followed. But the case was dismissed. Cheryl, the other worker who worked before Edith, was also owed $150,000. So what are the signs of trafficking for domestic workers trafficked by diplomat? First and foremost, debt bondage. It was not present in Edith's case, but very common for trafficked workers of diplomats and rich professionals. We actually had a case of a worker whose son was in an accident, and the worker had to produce $5,000 on the spot for his son's surgery. So she borrowed money from her trafficker, and she was practically working for nothing because she had to pay the trafficker for the money that she owed. But for Edith's case, there is definitely fraud in labor contracting. She had a contract, and that she signed before she moved to the U.S. She basically hinged, her entire dream on this contract that she would be able to provide, for her family. But when she came here, the contract was a fraud. It was a lie. She moved halfway around the world, because of a lie. And then there's also severe work exploitation. Like what Edith said, she worked from 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. If you can imagine that, she only had 5 hours, to sleep. And I'm not sure if Edith was sleeping, for those 5 hours, Yes, and she was not paid the minimum wage, no overtime pay or spread of hours, no benefits, no vacation days, no sick days or holiday pay. On the contract, she was guaranteed 2 days off, but her day off started on Sunday. She had to finish all her tasks before she left the house, and then she had to come back in the afternoon. So it's not even a full 24 hours. And she also was not given proper accommodation, which was guaranteed on the contract. Edith slept in a storage area with no proper heating. She had to wear a coat and a bonnet, while she was sleeping. And there's restriction of movement. There were cameras inside the house. Edith didn't mention this, that monitored, her movements. That's why when they were on vacation, they could tell that Edith was locking the birds in the cage, because they would call and say, Edith, you should free the birds, because, they need to be free. Meanwhile, there's a trafficking survivor in their home, right? There were also alarms set on the doors, so she could only leave the house twice in a day. In the morning when she picked up the newspaper, and then in the afternoon when she took out the garbage. And while she was out, the alarm was ringing, because the woman, who's also a diplomat, was working inside the home. So the woman knew when every time Edith stepped out of the house. And there's also restriction of communication. The callers monitored who Edith hanged out with. When she was out, they would call her, and then when she came home, they would ask, so who were you with? What were... I'm not sure if they asked their phone numbers, right? But they were definitely asking, who she was talking to, right? There was no direct physical abuse, but the abuse was more indirect. She was not physically hit or slapped or shoved, but just because the extent of severe work that she was doing, to the point that her body collapsed. There was also they were very subtle, with the emotional abuse. There was no outright cursing. It was more like very, I think it's very common for abusers, that an abuser doesn't even have to shout to show control. It can be very, calm voice, but the manner how they're speaking or what they're saying, really struck fear, in their hearts. And then there was also threats of deportation. When Edith, was trying to ask for a day off, because they only gave her a day off on Sunday. She was asking to have a day off on a Monday because no doctors work on a Sunday, right? So, and they were saying, that's unacceptable. And she said, well, if you're going to insist, then, and then she was basically being threatened that she should just leave, right? Imagine, if your immigration status is tied to your work, they practically, like holding her by the throat. So those were the signs of trafficking in Edith's case, and we can talk more about what services we offer and the organizing we do later. Thank you.
So coming back to this side of the table for a second, I'd like to introduce Vernon Salgado, who was born in Ecuador and migrated to the United States in 1984 and is now the senior human trafficking specialist at the Worker Justice Center, formerly known as Farm Worker Legal Services. He's been investigating cases of migrant farm worker exploitation since January of 2000 and is responsible for the creation of multiple human trafficking task forces throughout New York. Since 2001, Renan has been working in tandem with agents from the FBI, Homeland Security, state police, and local law enforcement units throughout the state of New York. He's also been training local, state, and federal law enforcement agents since 2007, and most recently, he has trained the Los Angeles Human Trafficking Task Force, the Mexican government's Attorney General's office, Mexican Interpol agents, prosecutors and judges from Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras, and Office of Victim of Crime grantees in how to proactively investigate cases of labor trafficking. Renan, I was hoping that you could kind of speak from, your perspective as an investigator, and especially as someone who's interested in doing this work proactively. What does labor trafficking look like from your perspective?
Good afternoon. So, labor trafficking is as simple as, in my experience, someone trying to profit out of someone else's labor, right? That would be the simplest form, outside of definitions and legal definitions. The way that it manifests itself can be from a legal perspective, or it can be just from a subtle, everyday life, we see it all the time perspective. So I've seen cases of labor trafficking that involve, restaurant workers, hotel workers, service workers in general, mostly with a focus in agriculture, have been most of my investigations. But to answer your question, and we were talking before, how do I sneak this in there? Labor trafficking can be something like federal agents using confidential informants, you know what I mean? Where you are basically coercing a vulnerable group, saying you are going to be deported, or unless you do this for us, and that this becomes something that is labor, that involves extreme dangers. There's been insane amount of deaths of teenagers who are not trained to do the work of a federal agent in a undercover sting operation of drug trafficking or weapons trafficking, yet they're put in that position through a coercive means, and the results sometimes are extreme financial gains from those works. So again, labor trafficking is hard to define, and at the same time very simple. But at the end of the day, I think that what I've come to the conclusion after so many years of really trying to research the why, the how long, the when, and all that, I think it's just a matter of is the foundation of our economy, labor trafficking in general, and we could go industry by industry as to why it is. I think we are very dependent on it. We give it different names like cheap labor, but that's basically what it is. I think whether we have good people, quote unquote, or bad people, quote unquote, in positions of power, at the end of the day, we are pretty much hostage to an economic system that we don't have a plan B for. So at this point, labor trafficking is just everywhere. It's just what it is. And if you take the word labor out of that, labor itself, like what is labor as a movement? What is labor like as industries? It's just industry systems that are pretty much set up for exploitation. Whether it is agriculture, it's always been tied to slavery, right, since the beginning of time, or whether it is construction, that it works on a bidding system, that the lowest bidder gets the contract, despite how much they're going to pay the workers on that. State fair, same thing. The state fair works on a bidding system. Who gets the contract of a state fair is who puts the lowest bid, and then you wonder, like, well, that's just enough to cover the expenses of your materials, and so how are you going to pay the workers? The person doing the contract, which would be the state, is not going to think about that or worry. So we could go industry by industry, and I could explain to you mathematically even how we make so much money out of a system that is set up, for us to exploit. Just to give an example, and this is hardly not talked about. Like the New York Times put an article, I think it was in 2009 or something, that at that time it said Social Security receives $11 billion out of the undocumented workers, right? Right now I think it's at $13 billion a year. $13 billion a year just out of undocumented workers goes into Social Security. So when you really think about what that means to federal taxes, local taxes, deductions from paychecks of people who are here supposedly as illegal aliens, who we criminalize, who we hold captive, who we exploit their labor, it really puts you in a mind frame of like, wow, like, you know, it's really systemic. You know what I mean? Like, we can romanticize it all we want, but it's really pretty simple. It's messed up. It's just, you know, the extraction of labor for profit as cheap as you can get. That's the bottom line. I mean, with other elements attached to it, and we could talk more about it later, like, you know, there's racism is involved a lot of times, or just power structures are involved a lot of times. Dehumanizing is needed sometimes in the equation in order for it to work, labor trafficking. So we could get into all of that, but that's just basically where.
And finally, I'd like to introduce Estelle Davis at the far end, who joined the New York State Department of Labor in 2012 as a supervisor for the Division of Immigration Policies and Affairs Agriculture Labor Program, and in 2014 became DIPA Counsel DIPA Counsel. She provides legal support for the various programs under DIPA, including labor trafficking and UNT visa certifications. Before joining DIPA, she worked in legal services in children's rights, women's rights, human rights, and criminal justice reform, most recently at Cabrini, providing legal assistance to immigrant populations. Estelle, as a state employee who, you know, is working on and investigating these cases, what is, you know, from where you're sitting, what does the labor trafficking that you see look like, and how is that kind of, how are these cases coming forward and unveiling themselves to you, or how are you unveiling them?
Sure. Is this working? Okay. So I think I would say the types of labor trafficking cases that we see at the State Department of Labor, I would say they have three different sources. One of them would be cases that we identify through the course of somebody filing a unpaid wage claim. So someone who wasn't paid minimum wage, wasn't paid a contract rate, wasn't paid overtime, and files a complaint for unpaid labor. And during the course of that investigation, they reveal something that would be force, fraud, or coercion on the part of the employer. The most common one is threats on the basis of immigration status. You know, the most common thing we see is employers said they would call immigration on this person if they didn't continue working, or you know, it can get into details of implied threats. You know what will happen, you know, any of those types of language that the outcome, everybody understands what it is, even if it wasn't directly stated. And then the second one I would see is really a promise of a future benefit. So I will help you get a visa. I will get you a green card. We've had individuals who were told you will inherit land, you know, just kind of anything that's some type of promise that would make this person stay in a position, which the employer has no intent of fulfilling. So one source would be cases that we identify. The second one would be cases that are referred by advocates, by community-based organizations. So I work very closely with the vast majority of the organizations in this room, and we, you know, work with them on what types of services they provide. We do, you know, trainings for staff on here's how you file a DOL claim, here's what happens, here's the steps of the process. We don't ask about immigration status. It's not included in our record, therefore it can't ever be subpoenaed, those types of things. And, you know, it's to, I think, doing that type of community outreach. We also do presentations to community-based organizations, and some of them, you know, might be legal services organizations. It might also be a particular ethnic group or a particular geographic region that has meetings that meet, that you know, do community organizing. And some of that really is a lot of the work that the panelists have been talking about throughout today, which is establishing relationships. You know me, I know you, and
what happens for me in a lot of my job is somebody will call and say, here's a scenario I have. And then I'm really talking it through. Okay, so if they filed the complaint, step one would be the employer gets a letter. So, is that something your client's prepared for? And kind of explaining what the process is so that the client can make an educated decision about whether or not this is a process they want to go through. Providing a lot of information. So I spend a lot of time talking to attorneys, kind of explaining what our process is and what's going to happen. Because our process is statutory. This is something that is the labor law that was passed by the legislature, and so we can't skip a step. We're going to go through it. And then the third sort of source of claims that we get are people who are looking for U or T visa certifications. And we heard about those earlier if anybody isn't, very clear on what they are. Immigrant victims of crime, so there has to be something that's related to the workplace. So we wouldn't certify somebody who was walking down the street and got jumped and had a serious injury that constituted a felony assault. But if we had a worker who wasn't paid for multiple weeks and kept going to their employer and asking for wages, and the employer responded by picking up a metal stick and hitting them with it, that would constitute assault with a deadly or assault with a dangerous weapon, and we could look at that for felony assault and the U visa certification. So some of those come to us way after the time when the incident occurred, and we have specific jurisdiction of, by statute, our claims can only go back 6 years from the date it's filed. So I think that's probably more technical than everybody needs, but we work a lot with advocates. We also have trained the investigators that if workers report anything that falls into these kinds of potential crimes, that those get investigated to me, and we try and do as much of an assessment. And I make a lot of referrals to legal services organizations. I make a lot of referrals to social services organizations to kind of help make sure that the individuals we're working with have access to the types of supports that they need. Did that answer the two questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the themes that we've kind of touched on throughout the day, but that I was hoping to get your perspectives on as well, is obviously the immigration enforcement and the fear of immigration enforcement kind of hangs over a lot of the exploitation that we're describing here. How have you seen changes in that in the people who you work with, either in policies or in what your clients are expressing as fears? Sure.
So, unfortunately, it hasn't changed much. It's always been pretty messed up. What has changed, very tangible, is the fears are a little bit different. Like, for example, during previous administrations, the fear was deportation, right? Today's the fears are detention. The word gets around very quickly, whether you're watching Telemundo or the news or not. And we deal, for the most part, like 99% with a population of undocumented Mexican, Central Americans. So that's the Telemundo reference. So whether they hear it through the news or just word of mouth, the reality now, the actual shifts that have happened policy-wise is that in previous administrations, if you were to get detained, you were being detained for let's say a week or two before being deported. With this new administration, it's pretty much indefinite. It's been increasingly so, and it's very well documented. You could research it right now, how the numbers have increased in the amount of detention days or the indefinite amount of days that exists with this new administration, and in part is because of the amount of money that is being made by these privatized detention centers, right? So again, it's all money and greed. The other thing that is pretty much going around is the whole separation of families is being used also as a deterrent, as a coercive means, because particularly from farm worker families with kids, they are much more afraid to even reach out to us now, those that have kids particularly, because they have those fears. They have those fears that their families may be taken away and being put by some foster home, and then next thing they hear on the news that 1,400 children have disappeared. So those things have changed a little bit. The other thing that has changed a lot, and it was mentioned earlier on by Amy Flashour from the International Institute in Buffalo, is the decrease in the priority that trafficking has now among some federal agents. I cannot talk for all federal agents, but I know for a fact with the Department of Homeland Security investigations, I've been working with them since before they were called Department of, when they were INS, and I've always been able to have contacts in each area of the state of New York that I trust for attending the task forces and working together on a case or direct case referral or something. That has completely is almost gone. Like Amy said this morning, we used to have 9 in the Western New York trafficking task force attending, now is 1. In the North Country, none. In the Capital Region, none. In the Southern Tier, I think 1, maybe sometimes. In the Capital Region, in the Albany area, we have a very amazing agent that was there consistent and now it hasn't been for quite a while. And because I have friendships with a lot of agents, I've asked them, like, is this something that is mandated? And, candidly, he said, like, yeah, it's something that we do have reports telling us that say from this point on to this point on, our target is this or our target is that. A few years ago, for example, the U.S. Attorney sent out this memo to HSI saying to stay off investigations on agriculture, right? So now the latest thing is just to deprioritize human trafficking on the whole, So those things have changed that I've noticed. Besides that, it's pretty much same kind of messed up things going on.
In the Damayan organization, the most fearful for us, I'm sorry. I'm talking on the air. All right, in our organization, the most fearful for the workers is the new policy of this new administration. The impact of this kind of policy, instead of speak up their experiences from their employers, they are so scared to do it so, because once they are vulnerable about that, they might have to encounter some problems of being involved with this kind of situation, because when they have to file case, maybe when they found out that they are not being trafficked, that's their connotation. If they found out that they are not being trafficked from their employers, they might have to vulnerable, and they are scared to encountered to be in the deportation or proceeding to the deportation, or NTA, we call it NTA. Mm-hmm. So instead of being having the boldness to join the organization, the negative is they are hesitant or reluctant to involve with movements or organizing projects, because they might be involved to the NTA or something like the BB deportation. It seems like something like that. So for me, if I were now in that situation, I may not be. I may have also that kind of fearness that I don't like also to speak up, because I might have to proceed to the deportation. So that's the connotation now, mostly from our workers. So though we have a lot of education, workshop, trainings, telling all this kind of system, policies, they close their mind because of their fearness of being deported. So that's what now we are trying to mobilize leaders to be, especially those trafficking survivors, to speak up their experiences so that it makes inspiration to the workers, not being silenced or invisible from their workplaces. So there are always challenges for us leaders, and Gabi is not a leader. I mean, it's not a Filipino, but she has that passion to help Filipino in the community as an organizer. It's really hard for them to convince them to join us because of that fairness. But still have the vision to do something else, for them to join, for them to be educated, to know about their rights, the human rights. That's the main thing. You know your rights, so that you have to live in this country peacefully. So that's the vision that we need to implement to our organization, to give more education, to mobilize more leaders, to organize workers involved with movements so that we can fight for our justice, for our human rights.
Thank you, Ate. So just in addition to what Edith said, I'd just like to give a little context, a bit of a context about the work that we do. So Damayan has been doing anti-labor trafficking work for 11 years now, since 2007. We have won 35 T visas, reunited 24 families with 50 children and 15 spouses. We've also won more than $850,000 in stolen wages, mostly from trafficked workers by diplomats or rich professionals. So with the new immigration policies under the Trump administration, we're seeing, we're bracing ourselves, for how it will severely impact our community. So actually for the last 2 months, in August and September, we've been doing a lot of information dissemination campaign with our members. We met them in August and September with about more than 100 workers, and we discussed the notice to appear, which Edith mentioned, and also the public charge. So I'm sure many of you know about notice to appear, that anyone applying for a change of status, if denied, they will be given a notice to appear, which will then trigger a deportation proceeding. So this will directly impact survivors who we work with pending trafficking cases, so meaning their application have been submitted to USCIS, and those who are about to apply. And based on our conversations, there were some common themes that we saw. First is the increase in mental health issues. It's a known fact in our community that almost 100% of our members have post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD because of labor trafficking. So we're seeing these mental health issues just really, ramping up, right? Imagine, they've been trafficked and abused by a trafficker already, and now they're afraid again. They don't know, like what one member said, we paid an attorney so that we can get caught by USCIS. It's another injustice. It's just one injustice after another. So they're also scared that they won't be able to support their families. Like what we mentioned, most of our members are migrant workers. They're here, to ensure their families' economic survival back home, right? They will fight it out, with ICE, with Department of Homeland Security, just so that they can work, right? Many of them didn't even think about pursuing a trafficking case because, what they really just want is to be able to stay here so they can work. So now, that's jeopardizing. Even if they have strong cases, they feel like it will compromise, their ability to stay here and to work. And then we've also seen cases of workers not wanting to file cases, even if they have strong cases. And that's really sad, because, like what one of the attorneys we worked with said, we will be seeing strong cases. We'll be losing cases that we should not be losing, because of this new policy, right? Even if we try our best, to educate the worker to pull out the signs of trafficking in their cases, it's not in our hands. It's in the hands, of the USCIS officer who will be reviewing their cases. So what has been our response, in Damayan? First and foremost, it's information dissemination campaign, because there's just a lot of misinformation happening in our community. So what we do is we explain. We don't hide, the information from them. We give it as it is, because our principle is that, they will be able to make the best decisions for themselves if they have the correct information. Our role is to just give them the information and then persuade them, to stay in the organization and to be part of a community and to continue with the organizing. So, like, for example, like what we did with the NTA, we discussed what the policy is. We made it very clear who would be impacted. It's those with pending cases and those with upcoming cases. And that, if you are already a holder of if you have already won a T visa, that, they're relatively safe. Because they're formerly undocumented, they actually still feel very threatened. Even if they have a T visa, they already have a green card, their families are here. It's just sending, like this waves of fear and panic, in our community. And then I've already mentioned it, the need for a community and organizing. Because that's the only way, that our community will be able to withstand this attack. We actually have this very inspiring case, of a worker, who really wanted to pursue her case, and I kept repeating, because I can't, influence her decision, right? I can only say these are the options. I kept repeating ate, which means older sister. There's a strong possibility that you will be deported, if your case was denied. And her thinking was that, well, if I file after Trump is removed, which is basically hoping that he will be removed, right? If I file a case after Trump's, term, it's the same thing, right? My fear will be the same, 2 or 3 years from now compared to if I filed the case now. So I may as well go through it now. And the only reason I will be able to do it is because I have you, you're my family, right? We're not just organizers, we're not just, case managers for them. We're also their community and family. That's it.
So in terms of changes that we've seen under this administration, I would say, echoing a lot of the things that the panels have said throughout the day, the beauty of coming last, is that we definitely saw for a short time, I thought there might be a decrease in the number of wage claims filed, but that doesn't seem to be true. That seems to hold up. And seasonally, we get shifts anyway, so it's kind of, you have to look throughout the year. We have gotten an increase in the number of workers reporting that their employers threaten to call ICE on them. And in the past, we would talk to the victim witness assistants at Homeland Security, and they would say, under, our policy memo, this is not a priority for enforcement, and so we would not act on those calls. And under this administration, when we talk to the same individuals at Homeland Security, they are very clear that the first executive memo that was issued put all discretion in the hands of individual agents of whether or not they're going to pursue one of those calls. And that makes a big difference because somebody can call that hotline and the employer can act on it. We don't know for sure that the Homeland Security is acting on a hotline call because that information is not disclosed, how they targeted this individual, what was the source? Was there, we're talking about workers who may or may not have criminal history, but if they do, it's very far in the past. So that issue of employers calling immigration on workers has been something that it has surged under this administration. I would say also, for the U and T visas, there's been a number of memos that have been of concern. I think everybody's talked about the NTA. I think also some of the, concerns about what those memos are gonna include for public charge. That was a big concern for workers, and it's still all going to be pending, what that looks like in the final case. And one of the things I've been thinking about throughout the day is that we have, we talk a lot about what are the negative things that have happened, and that's as a press release comes out about a new negative thing that is coming that we are focusing on, some of the stories that are survivors obtaining trafficking visas and obtaining unpaid wages and, actually having laws apply that have been set in place to address these situations working, don't get the focus that I think it might be helpful for them to get to kind of balance out that, yes, these rights still exist. Yes, we're living in difficult times where negative things are happening, but, the U visa law hasn't changed. The T visa law is still in place. The labor laws haven't changed. And then I think on a statewide basis, there have been, some executive memos that addressed state workers were explicitly told you cannot ask about immigration status unless it is mandated by your program. So for instance, at the Department of Labor, it's not relevant to minimum wage, it's not relevant to overtime. We don't ask that question. Even for UNTs, we ask, there may be benefits available, including visas. Please don't tell me your status. Would you be interested, yes or no? So, then from there we can make a referral. So it's kind of, how do you get at that information without having a record of it? But there's also been, for UNTs, there was a memo that was recently released that the state police, the Division of Human Rights, which does employment discrimination, also children's services in all 63 counties were trained. Actually, Suzanne Tomator, who was here earlier, was part of that training in doing UNT visa certifications. So I think there's some steps on local and I think we also heard about different city initiatives to try and make sure what rights can be enforced on those levels can be. I think that's it.
We should probably let the audience ask questions, but I did want to, before that, ask folks to talk a little bit more about what specifically immigrant victims and survivors of labor trafficking need to give them security even after they make the decision to kind of come forward and seek relief.
I would say, I think everybody's talked about economic opportunities, like having, I'm coming from labor perspective, so you need to have a job. How do you get another job? What job training is available? These are individuals who may have a history of trauma, so what is also the right kind of opportunity for them? And then the other thing is, for a lot of these legal processes, they do not happen fast. It takes 4 years to get an employment authorization for a U visa. I think the T visas are coming faster, but I don't know how long it's taking out. I think 6 months, a year before you get employment authorization. So, what services are available in the meantime? There's short-term state services. Once you get the federal T visa application in, there's benefits that come with that. So there's, those various programs. I would say for anybody that I work with, I always refer them to a social service provider that can, provide a higher level of care, maybe social worker, I think survivor rights groups where there's cohorts, there's always helpful.
Yeah, I would say, to take the angle of that question from what is needed to happen, one, I think decriminalizing based on immigration status. I think decriminalizing in general, I think the more we criminalize a group, the more they're going to be vulnerable, whether it's runaway youth or undocumented workers. And the other thing is to try to do a lot of more preventive work, whether it is trying to team up more with source countries and seeing what their efforts are there in terms of awareness campaigns before the migration begins. And also, try to see what parts in the way that the system is set up we need to address or change. And to echo what you said in terms of being like this positive things, there are positive things. Like one of the things that is happening now is exactly that. Like we've been in a lot of talks with a lot of groups, including the Department of Labor, of how to address, for example, the farm labor contractor position, the licensing of that position, how to look at what is happening that results in the farm labor contractor being the trafficker in most of agricultural cases. So there are positive things too. Also, before I wanted to say that, particularly for those in the room that want to know of like where to refer some cases or something, I know was talking about how that has decreased in HSI, but the positive thing is that other groups have kicked up to another level. For example, the Office of the Inspector General, the OIG, right now is having complete campaigns dealing with human trafficking in the H2 system and stuff like that. So there are a lot of efforts right now to address what the key problems, systemic problems are. But for the most part, I would say if I had to pick one, because I was living in an island, I just had to pick one, I would say if we could stop the criminalizing of people, whether it is for their documentation status or anything else.
You don't have to, but if you have things you wanted to add.
Hi again. In my experience, of course, when I was a victim of this kind of trafficking, it's okay. First of all, I need shelter because when I escaped from my employer, I don't know where to go because I lost my job. So first of all, I need someone who accommodate me. And aside from that, of course, I need to eat. Where to eat? I don't have work. So those are the struggles that I had. So once you leave your work, those are the possible things that you needed to have. So when I escaped, I learned from Damayan that through that organizing, they also give me access to some of the sort that it could help my finances. So I was enrolled with that financial assessment, and I got help from that. So through that, I rent a little room. I was in the attic. That's the cheapest I found before, with the rats around me in the nighttime. And sometimes if we have workshops in the Mayan, there are a lot, Filipino most of the time have potlucks. So when they have leftovers, I close my face to take those leftovers, which is good or better than my employer before. Because when I ate the leftover in the fridge, they scolded me why I ate them. So the Mayan gave me much better food. So I took them. So first, shelter, food, and work. So the Mayan also has cooperative. So the cooperative helped me a lot because they give me chances to work. So the cooperative has no question about your immigration. You can work freely. They will not question you who you are, as long you know how to work. So I fit to work at that time because I rest for 1.5 years, no work. I only have Damayan access to work in the cooperative once a week or twice a week for 4 hours. So for 1.5 years, I had those struggles. So for all, the survivors need is the basic needs. So I don't have also a much clothes the time. And maybe they observe that I only have 3 clothes to change all the time they must see me. So some give me also clothes. So that's the 4 basic do you need, clothes. So if you are working with survivors, you are much thinking about their needs. So Damayan always thinking about how do we help the survivors. So first, if somebody is planning to escape from their job, you always have plan, safety plan, and have their basic needs. So how do we provide them? So of course, we are having plan about that, and Damayan has those access.
So we're going to open up to, sorry, go ahead.
Yes. Oh, I just want to add to what Ate Edith said. Yes, that yes, we work with. I guess my take is more on the programmatic part, because Edith spoke, based on her personal experience. So Damayan work closely with different service providers. We're a small organization, but we have a huge network, that provide the shelter, counseling, right? So we work with Womankind, with Restore, Sanctuary for Families. If there are other social service providers in this room, we would like to connect with you because it's always good to work, with other organizations. And we're also a sub-grantee of TVAP, or Trafficking Victims Assistance Program, where the survivor gets financial assistance, every month, and other services. But I think most importantly for us, we have direct access to the workers because we are their community. We've been doing this work for 11 years, and we're still growing, because when our members go back to doing domestic work, they meet other trafficking survivors and they refer them back to Damayan. I'm not sure if I mentioned it earlier, Filipinos are the #1 source of A3, G5 visa holders. So meaning regardless of what diplomat, they're working for, they most likely have a Filipina domestic worker, in their home. For H2B, or seasonal, low-skilled seasonal workers, the Philippines is also one of the top 3 next to Mexico and India. And those are, really huge countries. So organizing is very important for us because that's how we break the cycle of abuse, in the life of a survivor. We have seen domestic workers who enter, relationships that who become survivors of domestic violence because they become undocumented. They don't know what their options are, so they they enter a relationship and the person is abusive, or they have they meet other employers who become abusive towards them. So in our experience, the cycle will not end. It will only end if you break it here. That's why we do a lot of consciousness raising, right? We do a lot of trainings, like Know Your Labor Rights, Labor Trafficking 101, the importance of being part of a community. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I've got a quick question, if I may. In your work, what roles have you seen local law enforcement play in supporting anti-trafficking efforts, or on the other side, making trafficking and exploitation worse?
You said making it worse?
I'm open to the fact that it might be either way, right? If you, in your work you've encountered local law enforcement and they've helped you prevent trafficking, I'd love to hear about that. But if they're making it worse in your work, I'd be interested in hearing about that as well.
So one of the things that I hear often is that survivors, and I mean, clearly it's true that survivors don't want to contact law enforcement, that victims, don't want to have contact with law enforcement. But I actually find that I encounter a lot of individuals that did call 911. I have a lot of workers who are assaulted in the workplace, not a lot, but, workers who are assaulted in the workplace by their employer or by a manager or somebody connected to one of those people that do call 911. And, sometimes there are reports done and charges filed, and sometimes there are not. We also see cases where domestic workers, the employer, says, you asked for a day off, you asked to go to the doctor for whatever basic human right reason. The employer then terminates the employment immediately and tells them they have to leave the home and they can't have access to their belongings in the home. And I've had domestic workers call 911 for assistance with getting their belongings out of the home. And I've had some of those cases where they were, also had unpaid wages and were referred to the Department of Labor or to small claims court. Or some cases where they were actually referred to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Also, cases where individuals go to the emergency room for a workplace injury that could be screened for trafficking. This person is working such long hours that they are having these types of issues. And I've had cases where emergency room doctors do identify this as a potential trafficking situation and make a referral, including to Damayan, but also cases where those are not referred. So, I would say it's a mixed bag and it's inconsistent, but those are the scenarios that I think could be better screened for trafficking.
So I'm going to give you the top two that are pretty much a big chunk of our clients' issues and run-ins with law enforcement who become actually the obstacle. One of them is assisted evictions. Again, most of our clients are undocumented farm workers who live in housing provided by the grower. The grower or the subcontractor, I assume, knows tenant rights, eviction laws. However, the most common thing is, you don't longer work for me, you gotta leave right now. And sometimes they call the police to assist them with the eviction, right? So very, very common, chunky in terms of our caseload. Another one is police calling ICE because they don't have a translator when they do a regular police stop. There's a long list, but I'm gonna stay with those two as like probably the biggest ones. There's a lot of little things that I wouldn't say is a problem as a pattern, but those two are extremely common. In terms of local, in terms of bigger, I think not so much law enforcement, but one of the biggest problems right now in labor trafficking is that most cases do not result in labor trafficking. The crime goes down as harboring of undocumented workers. There's negotiations with the trafficker to drop cases. We've had that in the State Fair case. So there's the bigger problems, and then on the local, I think those two probably are the biggest ones, the evictions and
I don't know if they wanted to say something.
Okay. So for us, it's really, to be honest, a double-edged sword. Because when the workers were still being trafficked, by the diplomats, their trafficker would threaten them, that they would get reported, to immigration, the police, right, USCIS, United Nations. And then when they escaped, became undocumented, and started their T visa application, now they have to face a law enforcement, officer. So imagine, the trauma, that they face. But I think in our experience, Damayan really plays a crucial role in that because they feel safe, during the interview. Or, we're not present in the interview, but they feel safe because Damayan helps explain, that this is actually a requirement, for your case. Especially for A3, G5 visa holders, specifically for G5 visa holders, they have to be interviewed by diplomatic security. And we just have to explain that, this is part of the process of pursuing a trafficking case. And that they will not try to deport you, really try to assure them, right? And counseling also helps, to help alleviate, those fears that they have. But it's tricky, for our community. So we do the best that we can to try to manage, that situation. But also, I should also mention that we do have great experiences with working with DOL, especially for our U visa cases. So it's not, they're not all the same.
Yeah, if I may add a little bit more. In general, there is fear of, the FBI and the police, and I think more conversation between advocates, like, Damayan as an organization, and the law enforcers, that victims who are referred to the law enforcers will not be compromised, especially when the process is still going on. Now, I want to go back to what Renan said, that one of the ways that we are looking at to fight trafficking is at the home front. Before the workers leave the country of origin. Yeah, so we have a memorandum of understanding with our Philippine consulate, and we're trying to work with them to give, to access workers who are trying to come to the United States or to other countries, to give, more information about the dangers and signs of trafficking. And one of the clear things that we are requesting from our consulate is, can we access the list of workers who are coming here to become domestic workers, especially for those who intend to work for diplomats. And our consulate says that that list is not with them, that the list is with the U.S. State Department, and that's the problem. So we don't know how to access the list of, domestic workers from the State Department, but we are just imagining that if we can just access those domestic workers, give them an orientation about trafficking and give them, an assurance that if they have contact with our organization and community, they have something, to rely on when there is trouble ahead.
Any question? Okay.
If I can chime in on that one, and Edith maybe can answer that to us. If I can ask you, how did you get recruited? Did you have to pay for your process of recruitment, and did you receive the pre-departure training through Philippine Overseas Association? And if there is an agency which solicits these type of recruits, maybe then we should seek answer to your question about the list of the potential workers, domestic workers, with the diplomats there instead of to your consulate here.
Thank you for that question. I've been working in Qatar before I came to U.S. And because I had 2 kids to go to college, I can't. I don't have the capacity to support them from my salary in Qatar. Though my boss in Qatar is very kind to me, they proposed me to increase my salary that time, and I only have 1 kid to take care of her. But because of the salary that not so enough for my family, and aside from that, I also have my mother that has no work. She's alone, so I was thinking to support her as well. So I was trying to search from the website. So I found a website that has access in U.S. So I applied. I filled out the one with my high profile, who I am. I'm sorry to. I gave all my experiences, my education background, and they're impressed. So they set an interview with me through video, but that time I don't have access, only for phone. So they called me on phone and interviewed me, and they said for some agreement. They sent me contract. So they when sent me the contract, that's what I said, that it's impressive. So this is easy job, I can do this. So from that, requirements or qualifications, I grab it because it's impressive contract. So from that kind of contract, I process all the requirements, and I searched about G5 visa. I studied about about all the requirements that is in the G5 from the USCIS what do you call that website. So when I studied those, I said, oh, this is okay. So I grabbed the opportunity, and I asked my former employer to proceed to the contract. So they sent me to sign it, and I sent them back, and then they send me with their signatures and present to the U.S. Embassy. So the U.S. Embassy allowed me to exit from Qatar Embassy to U.S. without any questions because I passed the requirements. But that's only requirements. But the actual thing is not that what the G5 required me to the employers to treat their domestic worker. And did I answer the question, or I go further? I mean, I lost.
You didn't use the agency in Philippines, but rather you were in Qatar already, and you used agency specifically that process.
Yeah. Yeah, in the Philippines, before I went to Qatar, of course, I borrowed money. We have business in the Philippines before, so we are not kind of life that is not the zero balance in the bank, because we have business before. But I was thinking to have a little bit capital to gain more profit from the business. So my husband allowed me to go to Qatar, but because when you're thinking about U.S., it doubled our value, the value of income.
Ate, ang tanong niya, gumamit daw ba kayo ng agency? Yes or no?
I did not use agency in the Philippines, but I attended orientation from OWA, the meanings of the OWA, Overseas Workers Welfare Administration. So I was oriented when you come to abroad, there are access of agencies that you need to contact with. But since I was being trafficked and I don't even go somewhere, I even hold my phone, so I didn't have the chance to call them. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah. We have time for one more question. No pressure.
Hi, this question is also for Edith. I was wondering, it sounds like the family, which I think you referred to as Kohler, the diplomats, is that what their name is? So I can Google them after.
Yes.
It sounds like they still owe you about $75,000. Is that done? Are you pursuing that anymore, or is that money just gone?
It was dismissed when we filed the case because of their immunity power. So it's been still on the process of thinking to continue the case. But it so happened that they're still here, and they're still working, and they still have the position, the power of immunity. So we are trying to connect to their country, because when we talk about the journalists in so it's still not clear, because I don't know why they have power when they are in the position. So at this time, we're still thinking how to get the money.
Well, thank you. Let's give a round of applause. Thank you so much.